Talk Show. Recorded live.
Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week we're celebrating the release of Drew's Halloween Man vs. Invisible Man from Monsterverse Comics by continuing our retrospective on Invisible Men and monster heroes. This week we're looking at Clive Barker's 1990 film based on his novella Cabal, NIGHTBREED, starring Craig Sheffer and David Cronenberg, of all people. Bear in mind that if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans we have. So warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson. With me from Austin is Drew Edwards, writer of the long-running comic Halloween Man, whose current collection, Halloween Man vs. Invisible Man, is available from Monsterverse Comics. Say hello, Drew.
Hello.
Hello. Also in Austin, Tony Salvaggio, lead singer and bassist of the band Deserts of Mars, writer of the Victorian Met comic Clockworks from Humanoids, and Saikon, the manga from Right Stuff and Tokyo Pop. Say hello, Mr. Tony.
Howdy.
Hey, hey. And also in Denver, with color commentary, host of the mom-oriented podcast Pod Moms, as always, attorney Julia Guzman. Say hello.
Hello, darling.
Hello. All right, NIGHTBREED. NIGHTBREED. Also known as Night_Breed on publicity material. NIGHTBREED is a 1990 American fantasy horror film written and directed by Clive Barker, the amazing novelist. Okay, based on his 1988 novella Cabal, the film features Craig Sheffer as Aaron Boone, an unstable mental patient led to believe by his doctor, David Cronenberg, that he is a serial killer. And by the way, David Cronenberg is the serial killer. Tracked down by the police as well as by the doctor and his girlfriend, Boone eventually finds refuge in an abandoned cemetery called Midian among a community or a tribe of monsters and outcasts known as the NIGHTBREED that hides from humanity. So we are watching this movie because we're interested in this motif of monsters as heroes and also of invisible men, which is such a, because it's all about Drew's story that is, a monster hero versus the sadistic invisible man. So this is the first monster hero movie that occurred to all of us immediately, NIGHTBREED. So let's get our first impressions, 30 seconds, 45 seconds or so. Let us know what you thought, and then we will go into it. Let's go, Julia.
Tooney. Let's call him Tooney for the
We're going to call you Tooney.
Not probably been the worst I've been called, but okay.
Tooney, the driving Tony. Okay, Julia, Tony, Drew, and then I'll go, and then we'll get into the topics. Julia, first impressions, NIGHTBREED.
Well, this truly is my first impression because I had no idea what to expect about this film. I purposely didn't really look into it or do any research about it, and so until after we'd seen it. And so it was interesting. I actually described this movie to my dad because he asked me if I'd seen any good movies lately, and of course he was a horror movie fan. So I was like, well, I'll tell you what we watched for the podcast. I would describe it as Indiana Jones meets Cabin in the Woods meets X-Men. I mean, it's a very interesting adventure monster slasher horror movie. And the most interesting thing I think about it is that the monsters, like you said, are not just the one monster, but all the monsters are really the good guys, and the slasher murderer guy is the bad guy, and he's the human.
Yeah.
And they all live. The monsters all kind of live off by themselves in a Midian, and in the Bible, Midian is where Moses goes for 40 years in exile. And God appears to him and says, go back to Egypt and free the Israelites. So they're like, I guess sort of the Moses or the chosen people or whatever. I don't know. Right. Anyway, so it's very interesting. And then I'm sure we'll get into if this is because Clive Barker being openly gay and the serial killer referring to getting rid of breeders. We have to get into how all that plays out. But anyway, I'll let you guys talk about what you think.
All right, Tony. First impressions, NIGHTBREED.
I really like this movie, and especially I think this movie is one of a few that I think really, really speaks to the horror tribe. Not only there's a lot of different ways, and there's a lot of subtext in what Clive Barker writes. It's kind of what makes him so fascinating to read. But when you're, especially for me, living in a really rural area, and I saw it when I was in community college there, And, I had a crazy school. I was getting paid to go to school, so that was really cool. That's kind of why I went there. But, we didn't really fit into that area, and we got hassled all the time by, the security guards and
really?
For being metalheads. And before that, anybody who listened to metal or, played D&D, you were a Satanist and all this terrible stuff. And I think I told, said on one
that's still what
podcast.
people say about.
Yeah, well, I think I was still on, I said on one podcast, some friends of mine got beaten pretty severely by just guys who showed up. They were camping out. They were metalheads. These guys showed up and, beat the ever-living crap out of them in the middle of the woods. So, when you grow up and here you have these monsters, these outcasts, as heroes, and they aren't absolved of, they eat people and, they've done terrible things to humans. So there's plenty of humans who would think these are evil. But in general, the monsters are the heroes. And you really start to feel kind of, we talked about with Frankenstein's monster in the Universal Frankenstein's monster. You kind of, it's the abstraction, from that, you really start to feel for how these people are put upon and everything. And we do lose a little bit of the kind of what, the Baphomet character is from the novel. They don't go into it as much because it's kind of hard to explain in this. But, in general, I really, really have a love for this movie, and I can empathize, from growing up like that. And I think, like I said, a lot of horror fans, I think, and the horror kind of tribe can really get behind the monsters because finally you have a movie. And there's been a few more before this, but not to this extent, I think, where there's a city where you can go, Hopefully, most horror fans won't try to cut their faces off in order to get there, but it gives you this hope that there's a place for you somewhere, and here it's Midian, but...
Now I'm going to start singing that damn song. Oh, no. There's a place.
You could only bring the Barbara Streisand.
But I really do think I think it's interesting too. Hearing Julia's synopsis of what it is. I think it's cool having someone who's not a horror aficionado. Like the way you summed it up is totally different from what I think a lot of horror fans would sum it up. And I think that's really interesting. Yeah, well, I just really think that's interesting. Like most horror fans wouldn't say like X-Men, Indiana Jones,
Right.
Like,
right.
But I think that's valid. I think that's really awesome, and I think that's part of why it's so cool having you on the podcast. It's because it gives a different perspective. But yeah, I don't know. I've kind of been long-winded in my first impressions, but this movie really speaks to me, and I think a lot of horror fans and outcasts and, the whole tribe who, may actually deserve to be in Midian. I don't know.
That's but I just want to point out that you said about the long-windedness of the. We all do this, and I always do these introductions where I go, first impressions, keep it to like 45 seconds. None of us ever do that. And actually, I think I don't even mean it. I think it's just some sort of ritual where I recite. We'll try
there has to be something to shame us all.
Yeah, well, but I think it's delightful.
We'll have some music that plays us off like the Oscars.
Well, it's like continuing resolutions in Congress. We're just basically constantly getting an exception, and we just keep playing the exception. All right, Mr. Drew, your first thoughts, first impressions of NIGHTBREED.
Well, first off, man, Tony, that's a tough act to follow. And two, I actually have always thought about X-Men while watching this movie because I actually think this is a better X-Men movie than any of the X-Men movies we've had. But, and I know that's I have a lot of people going, what? How can you say that? But I mean it. This is a movie that, like Tony, has always been very near and dear to me. I don't think it's Clive Barker's most accomplished work as a filmmaker, but it's my favorite for, it does speak to me as somebody who's never quite fit in, and I certainly channeled a lot of this movie into my comic book, Halloween Man. I mean, Halloween Man even kind of dresses like Aaron Boone. So it's
absolutely.
Well, again, if it's not his most accomplished work, it's not for lack of trying.
No, it's his most.
I
think
Barker,
it's his most
and there's a lot of problems that he had. I got to see the Cabal cut, which was really cool, and it also made me really sad at how grotty, and they're trying to restore it, so that's cool. But how grotty some of the footage was, just because out of necessity, that's all that exists, and that makes me a little sad.
Know, what? I don't know. I want to know what the difference between the cut that we saw. We watched it on VOD, right? And I know the difference.
I'm going to get the Cabal cut when it finally comes out on Blu-ray, but I'm glad we're talking about this one because this is the one I grew up with.
Yeah,
and
I think
this is the movie that affected me. I mean, this was one of the movies I watched the most as a teenager, and I think it really does, particularly to misfit kids. I mean, this is a movie that has a lot, and it speaks a lot to that outsider teenager that that is possibly into punk rock or metal or goth or whatever it is. And the funny thing is it predates a lot of the stuff that came after it, like Vampire the Masquerade or the Crow. Like, you can see that sort of beginning of that 90s monster culture that started
that's a really good point.
form.
That is a really
good point. What's really interesting is a lot of that came afterwards, where it is really truly the Crow is, for example, true vengeance, and it kind of comes from a different place. But the creatures in Midian, even though they are the heroes, are still really, really dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
they have their own thing that they're not.
They seem to have sworn off.
And when we say they're good guys, they are in the context of humans putting them being put upon by humans.
It's kind of like the Sharks.
Oh, God. Oh, God. You got it. Yes.
It's kind of like the Sharks in Finding Nemo, where they're fish are friends, or fish are friends, not food.
Fish are friends, not food. And that was exactly what I was going to say. In Finding Nemo, there's it's cool.
Sorry.
You got to the punch before I did. The sharks in Finding Nemo have a giant abandoned submarine that they gather in and hang out according to certain rules that they set down involving not doing that which comes naturally to them. And so, but that becomes really complicated. I'm going to skip my first impression because you guys said everything that really need to be said, and we should go right into it. Before we get into Clive Barker and his style, I want to talk about generally just this question about this is a movie about monsters and monsters as heroes, because I think that's really interesting, and we should jump straight to that. And these monsters are not ugly people who nevertheless want to do nice things. It's not that. Or maybe that's the case with some of them, but some of them are actually predators who would kill people if they hadn't apparently taken some kind of oath not to be murderers. And that's strange because that means that means we'd have to dig deeper into this world, of Midian, where they all live. Do you get the impression that they're all murderers who have vowed to Baphomet?
Well, I mean, they talk about meat being they smell meat. And then whenever Craig Sheffer's character does become a NIGHTBREED character, he also gets the taste of blood, and it's just like,
yes.
So they clearly are very kind of like vampires. They're clearly very.
They're a different breed.
They hunger for that human.
Yeah, they regard humans as food.
There's also all different species of monsters down there. There's not just it's not like, oh, we're all vampires, we're all werewolves, and in fact, they never directly call any one of these monsters anything that we, would associate.
That's why the X-Men thing does come to mind, because they're more like mutants than
right.
monsters.
But I think there probably is at one point where, like, say, Harlequin, the guy with the sort of flesh dreadlocks, who converts Boone into being a monster. I think at one point there probably were lots of guys like him, but then they got whittled down to, him and I guess Boone now.
So
but
this town Midian seems to be, just to recap for people who are still a little confused, Midian is a gigantic town in the middle of the desert, basically, in somewhere near Calgary.
Well, it's Canada.
Yeah, they're in Canada, and below an enormous deserted above ground cemetery.
I think they said they were near Edmonton, actually.
Well, the point is, there's an enormous abandoned cemetery, and below it is a vast cavernous underground city, and and in this city are many, many, many rooms and structures and places, and in there is just a vast population of many of them hideous, they're creatures, and some of them are human-like, and some of them are completely unrecognizable, so that, there's, one who's sort of a walking torso kind of person, who's sort of all rearranged, and some of them are, just truly awful. Now, I have to point out that in recent years in the X-Men, they've done a lot of the same thing. There's an X-Men character who is very close to being a monster from NIGHTBREED. His power is that his stomach opens up, and his whole digestive tract is actually these two worms that devour things, and he can take them out and throw them at you. And that's a really, really incredibly foul kind of a creature to be wearing an X-Men costume, but that really does. That's the point where the X-Men reaches all the way around to NIGHTBREED, and NIGHTBREED reaches all the way up to the X-Men.
Well, I always liked this better than X-Men, and actually most of the monster-themed superheroes in comics. And certainly this was something that I've always attempted for with my own character, Halloween Man.
Yeah.
Is that, when you have these characters like, Werewolf by Night or Morbius, that were monsters, but there was always, still a safeness to them. It's like what Tony says, you never feel safe with Palanquin. He's one step away from being, the wolf. He's one step away from being the Wolfman. And he does have that the animalistic thing going on with him. And,
and what's crazier is they keep the berserkers, who are even more they're just unhinged. Even they're afraid of these creatures that they have, caged up.
Yeah.
So, this
it's
tribe.
Isn't it that they've taken responsibility for those things? That there are monsters that the monsters are keeping that they're concerned about, and they keep them in cages below the city.
Yeah.
And
how cool is that, right? Monsters that the monsters are afraid of.
Yes, well, and all hell breaks loose. The police are attacking. Bombs are going off. Craig Sheffer turns to Doug Bradley and says, "How about we let loose the monsters that are in the cages down below?" And he's like,
"Well, and I call them the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles because to me that's what they look like."
That's
they're cooler than that.
I don't even know what to do with that.
I know, but I will have to give it up for practical effects though, of which is well on display in this movie, and it's awesome.
Yeah, the guy, when we think about practical effects, I think the one that strikes me most is Narcissi. Huh? Narcissi. Say it again?
Narcissi.
Not Narcissus, but Narcissi is played by Hugh Ross, is a crazy person who knows that the city of monsters exists. He wants to get to Midian. And he gets it in his head that somehow he can get there by slicing all the skin off of his scalp, off of his head, which he does with these really pretty groovy little knuckle knives that he's got.
Which he's been keeping just in case.
Yeah, he thinks that Craig Sheffer has come to take him there.
No, I know, but the fact is
I know. I'm just telling the
those
audience.
are in his pocket. Yeah, to at one point in time, he knows he needs to prove that he's hardcore enough to get to Midian.
Yes.
And so, man, and that's commitment. But again, this is
he rips the scalp off of his skull, and he does it on screen, and it's pretty rough.
That was pretty disgusting. I actually looked away for that whole scene.
Yeah.
But you know what? That's the grossest thing that happens in the whole movie. The rest of it is just creepy creatures, And I got to say, the creepy creatures, it's like that's why I mentioned it was like Cabin in the Woods, because it's just like kind of this freak show of one after another creepy creature and their various, domiciles. But there's not really much else other than that scene that is just really gory, I don't think.
I think that's true, because what we're leaving out is, and we should get to the serial killer story in a minute, because I want to go back and talk about Clive Barker here, but the rest of the plot really kind of heavily has to do with this serial killer. But even it's not that grisly. So, but speaking of grisly, let's talk about Clive Barker and his career. So, Clive Barker, British, gay, novelist, comes up in the 80s, and I think of Clive Barker as basically dealing in some I read Books of Blood, and what really ties Books of Blood together is just rich imagination. I mean, this is a guy, and if I had to say who else is like that, I'd say David Cronenberg, who's a co-star in this movie, is like that.
Yeah.
Somebody whose imagination just blows you away and impresses you, but it's also just extraordinarily dark. I mean, Clive Barker's vision is, one where just blood and flesh and all of those things just mixed together with, demonism and ghosts and sadness and perversion. And, that's
especially that last part.
What's that?
Heavy on the perversion.
Heavy on the perversion from story to story. I mean, some of them, like he did the story, one of my favorite Clive Barker stories is In the Hills, the Cities, which is about a gay couple that get separated when they're out, for a drive in the country, and they wind up getting wrapped up in this really stupid kind of Wicker Man style ritual, and it's tremendously imaginative. That it, like somebody said, hey, write a Wicker Man story, but kind of make it different, and it's amazing. But at the same time, there's nothing perverted about it. It's not. Whereas, other, like the Hellraiser stuff is just all about the notion of finding vision, finding enlightenment through pain and sadism and perversion.
Well, I even think here with some of the creature designs, I mean,
yes,
they're just like, they're terrifying and ugly, but they're also oddly alluring too. And I think that's a
major Hellraiser vibe off these creatures sometimes.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a big Clive Barker thing, is that he makes his monsters kind of sexy. And
was there? I'm trying to figure if any of the people involved in the design. Well, I know Clive Barker is also an illustrator, but was anybody involved in the creature design for these also involved in Hellraiser itself? And I apologize for my ignorance on this, but I literally don't know. In other words, did anybody here also make the Cenobites?
I'm not sure. I'd have to look up that. I forgot what I did know. I did know the company, and now I'm like, I'd have to look it up.
That's a terrible pop quiz to hit anybody.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to make us look like we don't do our research, Jason. My God.
Anyway, yes. Some things we have research that's really, really tough to grab. But okay, but Clive Barker, so he has this just vibe, and that means he has fans, and people are like, I can't wait to see what Clive Barker is going to do when he directs. And this is not his first directorial debut, but the sense I get, it's not his debut, but the sense I get is that this was his debut sort of in a big way. This is released by a major studio. It's going to be Barker's, real sort of arrival on the scene as a major director. And the movie actually was a disappointment. And the story that he turns in is a story that you'd expect, I guess, from the story, which is Craig Sheffer is a guy who has all of these problems. He has visions of Midian. He finds the world of the monsters, and he and the monsters sort of go to war with a serial killer, and in the end he has to find a new home for the monsters. That's the story, and the studio apparently had literally no idea what in the world to do with this. Joy, did you read about any of this? They literally had, I think they ended up deciding, The only thing we recognize in that whole sentence you just said is serial killer. So that's what we're going with.
Right. Well, especially like on the promotional material. Yeah. No, I think Drew's read a bunch of the back stuff, but I have not.
Well, Barker wanted to do basically the Star Wars trilogy of horror movies with this, and I mean, you certainly could see the DNA of a movie trilogy in this one movie. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's set up that you could spin off into other movies, and it's a shame, honestly, that they didn't, because you could have. There's a lot of interesting stuff here, but. The studio
I think it feels like a cliffhanger, actually. You get to the end of
the ending is totally a cliffhanger.
Yeah,
and I was always
that there's three. It's supposed to be three. Mm-hmm.
And I was always disappointed that there wasn't more of this as a kid, as a teenager. It always bothered me that there wasn't more of this. But
Good.
The studio basically marketed it as a slasher movie, because those were hot at the time, and Buttonface, the David Cronenberg character, certainly. I mean, you can look at that character and imagine a whole. And actually, that's a great compliment to Barker in its way. You can imagine a whole stream of slasher movies with that character.
So
as
let me ask you a
figure.
question, Drew. I know you read an essay about this, and I couldn't find the essay you referred to, but I'm curious about the whole issue of, like I said at the beginning, this slasher going around killing breeders, and to me it seems like, is that because Clive Barker being openly gay? It seems to me like he's saying this is how the world views us, as like we're going around destroying families, and that's how they think of us, or is that what you get from it? And also,
Joya, take Buttonface from the top a little bit. Tell us about this.
So when you open the film, you've got. Craig Sheffer, and by the way, I'm going to tell you a little aside about him, is that I always thought, I actually was introduced to him in a movie called Fire from Fire. I think it's Fire from Fire with Virginia Madsen. Anyway, it's a silly little movie that I saw him in. But before this.
It's a silly little softcore porn movie, to my knowledge.
Is it really? No, it's not really.
Anyway, it's like Skinamax, basically.
Well, it's possible. I did watch Skinamax at that time.
Okay.
But, never again, of course, after that. So he is being convinced by his shrink that he's committed these murders, and Craig Sheffer doesn't remember committing them. And so I immediately saw that and went, well, obviously the shrink is killing the people. But I mean, that's not actually that much of a secret. It's not like some films where that's going to be the big twist. Like within a few minutes, you actually are confirmed that yes, he is in fact the killer. But so then he's just going around killing families, and he says that he's clearing the world of the breeders, whatever. And so that's, of course, a term that has been used by gay people about straight people with children. And so I'm just curious if Drew, if you read an essay or something about how he would, what the point was, and also because this is also the AIDS epidemic era. So I don't know. So to me, it seemed like there was something there, but I'm not clear on what it is.
It's funny. Like, I've never taken Buttonface as a gay metaphor. To me, he's almost. To me, he's always been sort of this sort of force for conformity, like this. When he says families like cesspools, breeding over and over and over and over again, and then when he comes across the NIGHTBREED, he just has to wipe them out. To me, I always took the NIGHTBREED themselves as representing gay people and other minorities, whereas, again, a lot of this movie is kind of turning horror movie conventions on themselves, and Buttonface is very much, if this were a conventional horror film, Dr. Decker would be the Van Helsing character. He's the one that somehow knows all this lore, and he's directing the human authorities to wipe out these horrible monsters. And he's constantly saying these outrageous things that would be bogus, except that he's right. And but what you're saying about him is actually fascinating, because it does make it, kind of make me see the character that there's another wrinkle to it, that maybe he hates all these things because he sees something within himself.
He also, I think you get the impression, he's listening to the tape. He's mad that these are the things that get to be immortal, whereas he does not.
Right.
That he has a finite life, and this terrible evil thing gets to live. He's also the flip side of the coin from the priest. In fact, that's probably why they made the ending that they made, despite the fact that Clive Barker made a totally different ending and was really, when he had the film basically kind of taken away from him, they came up with the ending that we have.
So why don't you talk about that, what that ending is? People don't know.
First of all, give us the ending that we have here, because the priest character, I was confused by. He seemed to come out of nowhere towards the end of the movie.
Well, he's in the book. In fact, to be honest,
he's a bigger character in the book.
Yeah. This is a really close adaptation of the book in many, many ways. Even though the book is short, it's a novella. Like, there's a lot that happens in it, and so there's only X amount that can come out, on the screen. But yeah, in this ending, we get the priest who gets burned by the stuff in Midian when it's getting destroyed. Decides to use that to make David Cronenberg's character immortal, basically. Brings him back to life. Yes.
I thought that was a cool payoff, that Cronenberg's serial killer, after going to war with the monsters, is brought back by the mutated priest so that they can continue to make war with the monsters. I loved that. He also looked like a child of the corn hanging up there. He's sort of, David Cronenberg's character is crucified in a manner that reminded me a lot of the way they crucified victims back in Children of the Corn.
Well, it's also, in terms of horror movie language, at that point, the David Cronenberg character becomes a true late 80s slasher, and then, he's no longer a mortal man. He's actually just this undead thing.
Right. And they need to create supervillains, because they've just created all the good guys. The good guys are going to be on the run. We know there's going to be another chapter. This is clearly the opening chapter of, in a way, this is the whole story of how Craig Sheffer became the leader of the NIGHTBREED. So we know there's more coming, and so they have to set up some supervillains to face them. And so we've got this mutated priest and the revived serial killer Buttonface. So, but Tony, tell us about this alternate ending that Clive Barker cooked up that we were supposed to see but did not. So
Boone's going to leave Laurie at the end, and she's like, he's immortal, so where does that leave her? And she ends up, if I'm not mistaken, she stabs herself, and he resurrects her, making her NIGHTBREED. So they're a NIGHTBREED couple by the end. And then it's the head cop who finds, what's his name? Ashbury. Yeah. Instead of them bringing back basically a David Cronenberg supervillain, it's basically the priest is going to be the guy after him. So it's another kind of like, Clive Barker, makes no bones about, his past and being, ostracized and beat up and stuff like that. And clearly through a lot of his novels, you can tell he's working through some stuff. And having there's many books where the priests or the clergy of all sorts are the most evil, terrible things in the books.
Right.
And in this case, at the end of the movie, no exception. This guy's going to, start a new crusade against, and, he's clearly flawed. He's an alcoholic at best and, maybe worse when we find him. And so this idea that he's going to be the new,
he actually
taking the sword
jail when we first meet him in this movie?
Yeah. He's in the drunk tank.
He's been locked up, right. And he's been, he's injuring himself. He's clearly crazy. And then they bring him out because they wanted to talk to another prisoner. I can't remember the circumstances of that, but I do remember that he's I remember he's already drawn a lot of his own blood. So he's totally crazy. But this is a place where adapting a book is no fun at all, because you do get the impression there's a heck of a lot of this character that's being left, off the screen and off the page.
Well, and in the perversion part, the part where they're you're gonna if I'm not mistaken, it's been a while since I read the book. I seem to remember they do actually like get it on in the jail, and it's pretty graphic in the way that Clive Barker has made some of the most like erotic scenes as well as some of the most grossly erotic scenes in his books. And this one was like, it was pretty graphic. And it was, I guess, if I remember correctly, being younger, like, whoa, getting on the jail, like, but and here they go, hey, and I think it kind of in some ways works. He's like, we don't have time for that, and they just kind of like go,
Yeah.
But
wow.
But yeah, it's like I said though, it's a pretty close adaptation. I remember because I had seen the movie first and then read the book and was like, wow. Because a lot of adaptations just aren't, and especially something with so many creatures and, so much stuff to put on screen.
Well, in a lot of ways, it's like they took the Star Wars Cantina scene and spread it out through an entire city.
Yeah, where you move the camera around and you show one kind of scary person and the person maybe does a little bit. Like maybe they open their multiple mouths, or they kind of claw at you, or they show off their power. And it is, or like Joya said, it's a lot like those sort of background tours of the X-Men mansion in the X-Men movies, where you see people showing off, freaktastic powers that may never show up again in the whole thing. It's just
also as a sort of metaphor for for the gay people as they were kind of viewed at this point in time. There's this sort of Californian bohemian vibe to these monsters, to where they all have their decorated little apartments underneath the cemetery, and they're very, very glib and have quips about them, and you could tell Barker was having a lot of fun with envisioning each one of these characters as their individual lives. Because he does take great care to try and give most of these creatures a little bit of screen time, to give them an individual personality, even if it's not for that long.
But of course,
apparently, Susie Quattro originally had a big chunk, but then they had to cut her out.
Wait, who again? I'm sorry.
Susie Quattro.
Susie Quattro as whom?
The musician. They just said that her part was cut out because the movie had gone too long.
There's but when you're introducing characters, the difficulty is characters only get to become sort of real to us generally as we see them interacting with other characters, which is why the guy who why the character that bites Craig Sheffer and turns him into Cabal, the monster, we learn about him because he has somebody to talk to. We learn about the sort of seductress woman because she relates to Craig Sheffer's girlfriend and also relates to her daughter. And as they knit these relationships together among the monsters, then they sort of become real to us. But the rest of them just sort of popping around in the background, it's really just a tour de force. It serves no other purpose than to let us know, hey, there are a lot of monsters here. In theory,
I don't agree that there's no other purpose. I think he gives you these little short bits of these creatures, so when the humans show up and start wreaking havoc on their home, you actually care a little bit more.
Well, that's a good point. It's true that you care more because there's more of them there, but we won't only really come to know, in any sense at all, a couple of them, and the rest are just sort of, they're background. Now, if this were let's say that next year, for some reason, AMC said, you know what, let's do NIGHTBREED, the continuing series.
I wish that would happen.
22 episodes a season. You would get to know all these guys, I promise you. It would be China Beach with monsters.
Well, the comic book series, which follows the ending that actually Tony just described, was the Epic, which was the basically Marvel's equivalent to Vertigo at the time. The comic book series they did based off of NIGHTBREED was really cool, or at least I remember it being really cool because I read it back in the 90s, so I don't haven't seen it since then. But they even did NIGHTBREED versus Hellraiser, which was a lot of fun.
I've heard that those were great, and that they did carry the story along and went places.
Well, they brought in a lot of the Clive Barker universe stuff, because there was even some episodes where they had Rawhead Rex as the antagonist.
Wow.
Oh man, I'm so sad I missed this. I think
maybe that's going. Yeah, but now we have Comixology, which is, by the way, is where you.
None of that is on Comixology. I checked. The only NIGHTBREED thing on Comixology is the IDW adaptation of the movie.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was so sad because, I missed a bunch of those, I think because at the time I was really, really broke all the time because I was in art school, and I bought some manga. What little bit of money I had, I was buying manga, and I was occasionally reading some of the comics that my friends were buying, because I had to make those are the kinds of choices I guess I was making. I wasn't even able to buy that many comics, and I was always in the stores like thumbing through them. But I wish I had picked up those NIGHTBREED books because it is one of my favorite movies. So
it's so impossible to get all the comics that you want to get. Especially now that they're like $3 and $4 a cover price.
I'm sure I can go to my comic shop and alleviate this, when I'm back on my feet. But
or you might be able to get them the whole lot of them relatively cheap on eBay.
That's a good point. Yeah.
The point is not
hey,
too
audience,
long.
I hate to let you in on this where we just chat with one another about where to get our.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess the point is that I should at some point very soon, as soon as possible after this podcast, go and hunt these down. So. Well,
spinning this back around, like the other thing, that's interesting about this is that Barker does have this sort of extended universe, and I mean, we talk about like him developing these characters. Is he did actually think he was going to have 2 other movies to expand upon this?
I think that's clear. I think that he clearly thought that was going to happen, and because this movie ends like it's definitely the first chapter in a 3-part series. They're just beginning to get rolling. It feels like a complete ripoff, not to me, the viewer, but it feels like a ripoff to the creator. Because if he knew, it's not going to happen. You're not going to get another movie. I don't know if this is what he would have done. I don't know if that's. He probably wouldn't have introduced a whole new plot at the end of the picture.
Can I ask something of everybody before we move off the monsters and get to the real monsters of this piece, which are the humans? What is everybody's favorite monster in this movie?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Actually, there's so many. Man, it's just one of those things that, again, since it's practical effects, there's just so many cool. There's so many cool ones in the background too. But oh man.
The mom, because part of the thing is when the girlfriend Lori comes to look for Boone, who's Kirk Shepard's character's name. She comes upon this odd cat-like creature in the sun, lying in the sun, and this woman is at the door going, help her, bring her to me. And it turns out that it's her daughter, and the effect that the sun has on her is to turn her into this odd cat-like creature. But when she's back out of the sun, she turns into a regular, quote-unquote regular child. But anyway, her mother, is it Rachel? Is it the character? Or which one?
Yeah, Rachel. Yeah, Rachel.
Okay, I liked her a lot. She was a really cool character. And by the way, speaking of monsters, did you know that Doug Bradley's character is actually dubbed by a German actor?
Oh, really?
Yeah, he didn't expect it would be, but then
that's
it turned
terrible.
Out.
I had no idea. I thought that was Doug Bradley doing what I thought was a terrible German accent.
No, apparently it's an authentic German accent, and they got somebody German to dub it.
I can't believe you would pay extra for that, because it doesn't. First of all, I can't believe you would pay extra to hide Doug Bradley's voice, which is always really cool.
And Doug Bradley's got a pretty good speaking voice.
He sure does. I mean, Pinhead is one of the most quotably perfect sounding. I know that you can't quote a voice, but somehow you really want to try. Every time you think of Pinhead, do I look like a man who cares what God thinks? I mean, that's just, I love
the
that
accent,
guy.
not the voice that they had issues with.
Yeah. The actor, not the voice.
The accent.
Oh, the accent. Well, there you go. But
okay. Jason, who is your favorite monster?
Oh, Porcupine Girl. I love.
Gotcha, Porcupine Girl. Well, she
love that. Yeah.
She was my favorite when I was a teenager. I'm not going to go into that.
I'm still. What can I say? I keep wanting to call her the gypsy. I should say, I don't know, the Romani, the seductress, all that. She's an interesting character. I like that she has a daughter who is also a sort of weird cat girl. That's awesome. But, the Porcupine Girl is the most interesting one. Baphomet's fascinating because he's in pieces, and that's really wild, because the god that they pray to is also semi-alive and he seems to be just chunks of himself, just sort of hung off this lattice work that they've built, so they've got this sort of the head and shoulders and part of the torso and then other parts here and there around all sort of suspended. It's a fascinating and very Barker vision of what a god of monsters would be like. So
what's the name of the moon-faced guy?
I can't remember his name. He's cool though.
Yeah, I always liked him, and because they always, the one they mention by name, of course, is Peliquin. But then I'm always I always forget because I know they say his name, and then I'm looking back through the.
You're talking about the one who dies in the sun?
Is it Kinski?
Yeah.
Kinski, I think that. Yeah.
Kinski is Peliquin's friend, the one who has like a pet, if I recall, and.
No.
He's talking about the one that looks like Lorne, or not? What's his name from Angel? The one with the one that you called Jay Leno at one point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's on the.
Yeah, Kinski. That's right. Right. Which always of course, I always whenever I saw that commercial, the Mac Tonight commercial with the moon guy playing piano, or I always. In my head, it's always supplanted by this guy. I was always, which I'm sure for horror fans maybe they know that, but I think most people are probably well, that's that weird burger commercial. But for me, he's always this guy playing piano. Oddly enough,
it never dawned on me that his face is supposed to be a moon. That now is so clear to me, because that top sort of horn is supposed to be the top part of the moon, so when he turns his face, he looks like a crescent moon. Yeah, okay, get it. Didn't get that when I was watching the movie. That just went right over my head. Sorry to say. So there we go. Wow, I've learned something. That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah, but also the drumming guy who's or you get the impression there's more spread out, but just the way that they drum to signal everybody and someone. There's just there's just so many good bits in this movie.
And there's also that vast central location that the monsters have. That it was Joya that pointed out that it looked like the inside of like the mine in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Or also in Star Wars with that big whatever that room is that they swing across.
Yes.
Whenever she gives her brother the kiss.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's huge, and that set is really neat. And he's filming. The sets are all in England. He's filming in Pinewood Studios. I think the outdoor stuff is all in Canada, and
all it takes is a bunch of idiot rednecks to ruin it all.
Yes.
I just like that now, as this was made when it was made, and now, hey, look, it's a bunch of militia guys going out to lynch.
Yes,
the monster.
No, it is.
We haven't changed at all.
Well, and it goes back. I mean, think of it. That's how Easy Rider ends, right? They're out on the bikes, and a couple of hicks ride by, and.
Well, the thing that's interesting here, though, and again, so much of this movie, they're turning horror movie convention on its head.
Yeah.
In a typical horror movie, in your classic horror movie,
yes,
these guys would be somewhat more justified in what they're doing. But I do really strongly feel like Barker was taking the angry villagers from the Universal movies to their logical 20th level extension.
If the monsters were good, right? and they're really just like, also, you think of any movie, which is almost all of the creature films, where there's a bunch of creatures, and towards the end, the heroes who involve a cop and maybe a doctor and some other people like that, and some teenagers and some farmers, and they gather together and they figure out where the monsters are hiding and they do a raid. And they do that in Lost Boys, and they do it in Aliens, and they do it in Attack of the Eye Creatures. That's just what you do. You know where the monsters are and you go get them. And except for in this time, the monsters are good, so you're watching as the humans are gathering together to go and slaughter them. And I loved what you said, Drew, where you pointed out that the David Cronenberg is playing a serial killer who basically has blamed the serial killings on this guy who's now become a good monster. And so he's literally hanging out with the police the whole time. And so you think, wow, those police, well, how unfortunate for them that they've got a serial killer amongst them and they don't know. But then you find out, no, there's not a nice policeman amongst them. They're all monsters.
Well, the nicest one is the guy from Calgary who is the
detective,
the black cop, but he's still kind of slimy, you know.
Well, I mean, he's kind of been used. But what's interesting too is Cronenberg's character is again more evil than anything else, because he's his evil is different than supervillain evil. It's the actual evil in the world, the subtle, the subversion, the way that he's, you get the impression he might have done this before, blamed murders on patients.
Yes.
That the way he manipulates people, the way he turns things around, the way he's willing to, meet a girl, and just because she's kind of tangentially associated, he kills her. He's more evil than any monster almost ever. And
the poor girl. So Laurie, the girlfriend of Craig Sheffer, befriends this woman, and immediately the woman meets a guy and says, "Oh, I've met the guy, the man of my dreams kind of guy," and it turns out that it's just serial killer guy, and he just kills her. And what was even the point of that? I mean, I didn't understand his purpose.
I mean, it's one of those things. Hey, he's there. He knows her. Once he realizes, because he's smart. I mean, that's how he is. That's just.
But I mean, what was his goal in killing her? Like, because he didn't think it was.
A, he likes to kill, and B, she's associated with Laurie.
Yeah, I got the impression he killed her ostensibly to keep her from talking, but really, I think he just killed her because
there was no purpose for that. I mean, there wasn't any.
But he's a sociopath. That's
right.
I think that's the true. Some of the breed, some of their stuff is instinct, the monsters, and some people do things because they were raised that way. His character has made these choices throughout life.
Well, and, you know what? Does Buttonface maybe belong? Here's a good question. Maybe he doesn't look like a monster, but maybe he is one. Does he actually belong in Midian? In other words,
no.
I don't think so. I don't think he could ever. I don't think he could ever allow himself to.
No, but he does belong in Midian because he gets selected. He gets selected at the end.
He doesn't get selected. He gets kind of forced upon him, same as the.
And B, that wasn't ever.
I thought the whole point of that. I thought the whole point of that pot, whatever that cauldron was that it was some kind of judging, and it was like if you were deemed worthy, then this cauldron thing would bring you back to life.
Well, two things. A, Clive Barker never wrote that, so that was never his intention.
Well, we're talking about the movie, not the book.
But he didn't choose that in the movie either. Right. Like he was making the movie, they made an ending that he didn't approve of. So
that ending, he didn't even have anything to do with that ending? Like he didn't even
nothing. No, absolutely not. He's pretty pissed off that that's what they did.
Yeah.
Wow.
So A, not supposed to be there. B, it was put upon him by Ashbury, who's like, oh, you're going to be the new, guy. And so he takes.
Yeah,
there's nothing at the point Baphomet's already gone. Like there's no judging involved in that after that.
Oh, okay.
They're not the NIGHTBREED group.
Oh, you're right. Baphomet is the one that judges, not the cauldron. Yeah. Okay.
Correct.
So
Buttonface, and they go into this a lot more in the in the book. Like I said, he's this sort of knife for a pure, you know, he's almost like a Nazi. And,
absolutely.
And, you know, he wants this pure world where there's this sameness. And, you know, the fact that there are these creatures that are beyond death are kind of aberrant to him. And,
right.
You know,
and in
what
fact,
he
again,
does.
they have stuff he doesn't have. Like, they have an immortality that he doesn't have. It's that, you know, and again, it kind of goes to, you know, some homophobes who, you know, have this pin-up aggression because maybe, you know, they are either jealous or they're, you know, have homosexual tendencies, and sometimes that comes out. You know, that we've seen it, you know, time and time again. I think, you know, Barker's kind of saying that too, because I mean, there's a lot of stuff. Like, you know, if you really go in and analyze a Clive Barker book, there's a lot of stuff in there. And as you know, rereading it, you know, as a kid, some of it I didn't get, and some of it later on was like, wow, that was even deeper than I thought. You know, there's this jealousy as well as hatred that's going on with his character, and it's, you know, again, and plus he's just a sociopath. He's terribly evil.
He seems to have some Well, I mean, it's hard to pin down exactly what his hang-ups are, and I have no doubt there are many. He seems
the book really does a good job because he has a lot of internal monologues between the Dr. Decker personality and the Button-Face personality, which are more independent of each. You know, stuff that works well in a book, but you can't really illustrate quite as well.
Absolutely.
in a film, but. You know, but there's still also like the surface level thing is that he's just a cool looking character. You know, like there is, you know, you know, even it's easy to think of him as a monster because, I mean, Barker and the people who designed this character for the film did a great job of creating this almost perfect 1980s slasher movie icon that just never existed because he has like this 80s yuppie thing going on with him, but then you have this almost scarecrow-like mask attached to it. I mean, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it is, and you know, it gives you the impression that there's a whole serial killer movie going on parallel to this movie in a sense, except for that they end up bleeding into one another because our serial killer manages to derail his own story of being a serial killer and getting involved instead in this strange city of monsters. So the impression I get, you can tell me if this is right from the book, but the impression I can get of the wonderfully named Philip K. Decker, Dr. Decker he thinks that his model of being is the way to be, first of all, you know, which is to say extraordinarily clean, extraordinarily smart, extraordinarily non-sexual, and unattached, and sort of perfectly individualized. And so the concept of people having messy, sordid, weird, bloody relationships with one another and forming families and doing all that stuff, all that bodily stuff that people have hang-ups about, that's the stuff that he's out to punish, usually in ways that involve erupting a lot of those things with the blood and the flesh. Now, the funny thing is, if you said, hey, I got a character from you, I just described them to you, who do you think invented that character? I wouldn't say Clive Barker. I'd say David Cronenberg. And it's amazing. Perfect. You know, this is such a Cronenberg. I cannot believe that he got Cronenberg to play this part. Can't believe it. It blows my mind. This is probably the best movie performance of a film director I've ever seen. You know, unless maybe you count John Huston in Chinatown, probably is a stronger performance. But this is pretty darn strong. I mean, I'm amazed. If you, it's so wonderful to see to see David Cronenberg, the creator of Videodrome, you know, and all that other crazy nonsense here.
Yeah,
he's a pretty good actor. I mean, it would be very easy to get lost if you know who this guy is. It'd be very easy to get lost. Like, hey, there's David Cronenberg, and that's all you can think about. But like, I don't think about David Cronenberg while watching this. I think of him as Dr. Decker, and I think in part because he is such a great character design on top of everything else. Like, I can't say enough. I mean, there's a lot of great design work in this movie, but like I said, you could easily imagine a slasher movie series with, like, 12 sequels with this character.
I think they could do it tomorrow. I think the funny thing is, it's not like this character doesn't still belong to Clive Barker. I'm sure that he could do a button-face series, you know. I'm sure that Boom Studios could, or IDW could put out button-face comics tomorrow if they wanted to, and they should actually. That'd be really awesome. All right, I know that we've reached the point where we should wrap up. So let's do this. Let's go around and get our final thoughts on NIGHTBREED, and then come around and do our endorsements. So same order, if that's all right. Julia, are you ready to give us your final thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think we've said most, or I've said most of what I wanted to say about it. But it's an interesting movie. I would like to read a little bit more about sort of what the socio-political climate, how that influenced, you know, him, or see an interview or something. I wish I'd done that before, but anyway, I think it's all very interesting. But certainly the whole Monsters as Heroes theme is fantastic. And there's everybody's so complicated, so multi-dimensional. Anyway, so I'm glad that you introduced me to it, Drew and everyone, because you know, it's a good thing to have under my horror movie belt here that, you know, continues to get wider.
I'm glad you were able to recommend it to your dad too.
Yep.
All right, Tony, final thoughts, NIGHTBREED.
I'm a huge Clive Barker fan, and really big. I don't know what else I can say other than it's really struck home when I first saw it. I don't even know if it played in the closest town I could have seen a movie at, but definitely once it was on VHS, I watched it more than a few times and then owned it as soon as I could. It really, really spoke to me in a lot of ways, and it's one of the best adaptations as well. Just in practical effects, again, just if this was redone with CG, I think it would lose so much. And I'm not even super anti-CG. I just think that there's a certain coolness to what they did in this film. And I'm really also psyched to see the Cabal.
You'd be in trouble because that's kind of your job.
There's a great
yeah. But I have friends who are,
character animator, in case you're wondering. So there's like
I mean, I have friends who are super anti-CG, and I understand where they're coming from. I think actually one friend of mine put it in the same way that I put it. When you notice CG, it's failed. And I think, you know, when you notice CG as CG, it's a problem. And even as a fan of a lot of CG things that you can do, I definitely get where it's coming from, because I've seen a lot of stuff that takes me out of a movie, even if friends of mine don't notice it. But there's so much good stuff, and even the stuff that's a little wonky, just, I don't know. There's a certain amount of care put into, I think, a lot of practical effects. And it's a stunning movie. I wish there was more, and I need to pick up the comics. So I recommend this to anybody who's been an outcast, and especially horror fans. But I think, you know, you don't have to be a hardcore horror nut to kind of get this movie. I think you could branch out a little bit and you'd be fine.
Well, I actually think that Cabal and this movie are kind of the genesis of what we now call dark fantasy.
I would agree with you there.
Yeah.
Or urban fantasy, or whatever you want to call it. I think there's something to that. I think that's really right. All right. So, Drew, final thoughts, NIGHTBREED?
I could talk about this movie for another hour and a half, if not longer. It's like this movie, you know, this is one of the things that, you know, since we are talking about my writing, it more than just like the individual Halloween members of the Invisible Man story, although certainly I channeled a lot of Dr. Decker into my version of the Invisible Man, who is a horrible sadist. there would be no Halloween Man comic book without this movie very specifically. I mean, there's just a lot of elements in this that when I was creating the character way back in the day, like that I was heavily thinking Nightbreed. And, you know, the way they do the undead is specifically something both dead and also slightly animalistic is also endlessly fascinating and appropriate. And I don't know, like I said, like this is something that's in the regular rotation. I watch this movie often. Like Tony, I would recommend this for anybody who doesn't feel like they fit in. You know, this is a great movie for the misfits of the world. And I'm very, very happy that Clive Barker made it, even if it was a troubled production, because it's near and dear to me.
Wow. And yeah, sometimes troubled productions, I mean, seriously, you know, you hear about that, and sometimes it shows up on the screen with amounting to a certain confusion, and sometimes, you know, a movie that can be wonderful and show not a flaw, and you realize in the background that it had all kinds of troubles. This is by no means perfect movie to my mind, but I really enjoyed watching it, and you know, I agree. I mean, I think I agree with exactly what Tony said. In my mind, this is the first part of a series that just happened to get canceled, you know, and that's okay. It reads that way. I can watch it and go, you know, wow, so I caught the first episode, and hey, did they ever make the other ones? Oh, no? Well, that's kind of disappointing, but that's the way it feels. Very, very interesting ideas and an amazing introduction, oddly enough, to both Clive Barker and David Cronenberg. So I think, you know, it what a wild movie for us to pick up with this week. I think that was a great idea. So let's come back around for endorsements, and then I'll tell you what very strange film we're going to follow this up with next week. All right, what order did we do this in? Julia, are you still there? You have anything to endorse for us?
I mean, not really. I watched Jack Ryan, Shadow Recruit, and found it entertaining. I don't know. It felt to me like nobody really talked about it that much, but I thought it was a pretty entertaining movie. It's not like the best thing ever, but if you like, you know, fun adventure movies with, you know, Jack Ryan as a young man, Captain Kirk as Jack Ryan, then you know, it's a fun film, and there's also the entertaining bit of getting to watch British actors do accents. You know, like Keira Knightley gets to do an American accent, and Kenneth Branagh gets to do a Russian accent. So
it's really, really good. I mean, at least the final like 45 minutes is some very amazingly choreographed action. I had no idea that Kenneth Branagh would be that good at doing just modern urban, you know, spy action, but it's really pretty good. So that's a good one. Tony, any endorsements for us this week?
I'll stick with Clive Barker. If you haven't read it, then you should read Cabal. You should also read the Books of Blood. In particular, one of the stories that's always stuck with me, and I'm not sure exactly why, is called Human Remains. And eventually, like, it's about a gay prostitute who stumbles upon a statue that then comes to life. One thing that's always just struck me is the way that Clive Barker tells the story where eventually the statue becomes more human than the human who finds him. And just the way it plays out and the way he tells it has always, there's something about that. And yeah, sorry I spoiled it, but you should really read the telling of that. And I mean, there's so many good stories within Books of Blood. And, you know, some of them have been adapted to Tales from the Dark Side and a few others.
Midnight Meat Train was made into a movie.
Yeah, Rawhead Rex was a movie, which is kind of works and kind of doesn't. But
Midnight Meat Train was made into a movie.
Hellraiser, I believe, was originally part of the Books of Blood.
It was Hellbound Heart, actually.
Really?
But there's a bunch of, I mean, there's a lot of great stuff in the Books of Blood. And also, if you want to know a little bit more about Clive Barker, both the person and the artist, I'm looking on Amazon, and it's so cheap. You can't not get this. It's Clive Barker Shadows in Eden, and it's just full of his illustrations. He's a fantastic illustrator, just disturbing but amazing. His just weird brushwork and just in general, his illustration style is something that you should see if you haven't. But there's a lot about it, a lot of nonfiction in there too. Clive Barker's Shadows in Eden. It looks like you can get it for like a penny plus like $3 shipping or something. Which for $4 you should have this crazy awesome hardcover. I got mine at like a Half Price Books or something. It's one of them. Reading through it, you get a little bit more of what Clive Barker's about and kind of understand where he's coming from, as well as just see, even if you just just flip through it for the illustrations, it's worth $4. So I highly recommend those. You should definitely pick that up, and the Cabal cut when it comes out.
I got Books of Blood right here. Volume 3 is the one that has Human Remains, so I'll have to check that out this week. I don't understand. I think that Books of Blood may have been one gigantic volume that was then cut up into several smaller ones for paperback purposes. The paperbacks are just the right size, like 300.
Yeah, because I read it in paperback first, I think, and then I think I got the collection. I have to double check on my shelf.
He's astonishing.
But there's so many good. I mean, there's so many good books that he's written, and I was trying to think. There's one that was the most disgusting. Had one of the most disgusting. I think Damnation Game was the one where there's just some scenes in there where I was like I've been squeamish sometimes about, Stephen King can tell some horrific things, but man, oh man, there's some Clive Barker stuff that's oof.
It is amazing.
Damnation Game is the one.
You read something in a novel and it truly stays with you and makes you open your eyes at night and just remember that and sometimes wish that you hadn't actually come across that bit of writing. That's some powerful thinking.
Some of the grotesquerie at work in Damnation Game, especially a couple of scenes in particular, really
don't spoil it.
stuck with me. No, of course not. But I recommend that as well. I don't know. Just go to his Wikipedia page and just read all that's there. Just do that.
So Cabal is actually Books of Blood Volume 6, apparently. So Books of Blood is really just it's just a rubric under which Clive Barker released a whole lot of his short fiction. And maybe that's where I haven't read enough of his novels. Maybe short fiction is really where he thrives. I'll tell you, Little Cities is just one of the most memorable short stories I've ever read, ever. And it was such an unusual and neat story. And like I said, it's like taking Wicker Man and coming up with something truly unique and new because you gave it to Clive Barker to do.
But
cool
he
stuff.
really goes out, like, he'll have something like Hell Down Hard and Cabal that are novellas, and then he'll have Weave World and Great and Secret Show, which are huge, really thick, king-sized, Stephen King-sized books as far as what we think about when we think of, It or The Stand or something like that. And those two in particular, Weave World and Great and Secret Show. Whew,
fine
also
stuff.
Really good.
Very, very, very fine writer. Not for the faint of heart, oftentimes, but I mean, for Pete's sake, this is prose, so we can all suck it up. All right, my endorsement, man, I'll second that endorsement that you got to read some Clive Barker. I think you got to watch some David Cronenberg. I already said that. I also got my hands on something new that I'm really excited. There's a new book called The Anatomy of Zur-En-Arr, which is just a giant 300-page study of Grant Morrison's run on Batman. And what's awesome is that it gives you all of these sort of rules for like what makes a Batman story and what differentiates good Batman stories. And that's something that's worth thinking about because when you think about it, they've been telling Batman stories for like, whatever it is, since the 1930s. And
75 years.
Yeah, and some of them are memorable and some of them are not. So spending 300 pages studying somebody who was good at it and comparing and contrasting, it's neat stuff. So the book is called The Anatomy of Zur-En-Arr, which is a reference to one of Batman's split personalities, but understanding Grant Morrison's Batman, and it's by Sequart, which is a publishing company that does nothing but books about comics. So neat stuff, and So it's by Cody Walker. I'm sorry, it's about Grant Morrison's Batman, but the author is Cody Walker. Anyway, and Drew, I think we skipped over your endorsement.
Yes, you did, and I'm glad you noticed because I was going to wave my finger at you.
Yes. So tell me, what do you have to endorse for us this week?
Well, I taking a note from Tony, I would like to endorse my favorite Clive Barker book, which is actually The Thief of Always, which is his children's book.
Yes.
And it is wonderful and was almost made into an animated movie, and I still hope that they do that at some point. But it's just a brilliant example of how talented Clive Barker is. That he can take everything, like it's still very much a Clive Barker book, but put it on the level that it can be enjoyed by kids as well as adults. And it's also a vampire story for you vampire fans out there. I also, self-servingly, you buy Halloween Man versus the Invisible Man on Comixology. It's $1.99. It's 106 pages. You should also go on the Comixology and get Halloween Man issue 2. Yeah. Also $1.99 for 60 pages. In fact, we have 4 things up there now. They're all $1.99. You can get everything we have up there very cheaply. And I said this last week. Every fan counts. Like this is comics at a level where, believe me, we are going to notice you. We are going to appreciate you. Marvel and DC, they may not necessarily, they have thousands upon thousands of fans. They may not necessarily notice you. Believe me, when you're at the level we are at, sorry, I'm losing my voice again. When we are at the level we are at, we notice you. So please go on there, read our stuff, tell your friends, spread the word. We need you.
I'm not connected at all to Halloween Man, but I will second everything you said. That as a, first of all, I have picked up Halloween Man too, and I'm really fascinated by this story where a revived zombie superhero confronts the questions of body image. I'm really interested in this.
Well, like that one in particular, it's strange even by Halloween Man's standards. But
you've been getting some press about that.
I'm getting a lot of press about that, even in fashion magazines, which is not a place you'd normally imagine to be talking about comics. But one of the things that really sparked that is, DC recently did the whole New 52 reboot, and most characters in comics, all the men have the same body with different heads, and all the women have the same body with different heads, and that's always kind of freaked me out. But there's been a few notable exceptions. But when DC rebooted their line, like the best case example of this was like Amanda Waller, who was previously one of the only, is now whip thin like everybody else. That freaks me out. Like the homogeny of that freaks me out. So this is my story where I address that, and I think body image and size acceptance and all these things, these are issues that need to be discussed, and comics are just as good of a place as anything.
Well, I really think that's fantastic. I was so disturbed by Amanda Waller becoming a skinny version of herself, just like I was disturbed to see a cover of Wonder Woman recently, where Wonder Woman had lost all of her muscular bulk and had become this sort of, hey, I think it's perfectly fine to be skinny, but she had become this extraordinarily scrawny waif, and I was like, that's not. Well,
you would even think of all people, the Power Girl would be safe because she's a cheesecake character, but they even rolled her into this. No, it's totally okay to be skinny if you are built. You should, people are built how they're built, but it's not okay for everybody to be the same, and that's really what I'm getting at. Like our entertainment is supposed to be a reflection of our world. And, people are so varied and wonderful and beautiful, and I would just like to see that reflected. And so this is my reaction. DC Comics, this is for you.
Very good.
Again,
awesome.
They go, and that also goes back to NIGHTBREED.
It does.
That's why it's awesome.
It does. Full circle.
Outstanding. Okay, well, very, very cool. I think that's everybody because I got mixed up circling around again, but I'm glad we did because I really liked that sort of mini chatter about, and I can't wait to finish reading that tonight. So, all right.
Please let me know. Please let me know what you think about it on the Halloween Man Facebook because I'm trying to liven that place up.
And to everybody else, in fact, let us know what you think about this show on our Facebook page, Castle of Horror. And also, you can leave reviews on iTunes, and you could, just like us on Facebook and send us to your friends. We want to hear from you always. It makes a huge, huge difference. And also, those of you joining us from Bleeding Cool, you rock. We're glad you're there. So next week, we are back with Freddy versus Jason to wrap up this retrospective.
Place your bets.
I'm not sure who the monster hero of Freddy versus Jason is, but we're going to find out.
It's debatable, but I think it's Jason.
All right. I mean, I was probably going to come down on that side. So, all right, Freddy versus Jason.
If for no other reason than that's your name.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly. I've got a little Jason action figure on my desk right now as we speak. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. We will see you next week. Once again, leave us comments. Adios. Good night.
Ciao.
Good night.